Savannah, Georgia had a way of holding onto its traditions. The cobblestone streets and hanging Spanish moss told stories of a town steeped in history, where change came slowly if at all. For Amelia Carter, the steady rhythms of this small southern city provided the perfect backdrop for her carefully controlled life. Her Victorian home, passed down from her grandmother, stood as both a sanctuary and a reminder of the legacy she was determined to preserve. As a history professor at the local university, Amelia was respected for her knowledge and composure, though few truly knew her. She had long ago mastered the art of deflecting personal questions with polite smiles and measured answers. Savannah wasn't a place for loud declarations, and Amelia knew better than to invite scrutiny, especially when it came to her private life. The second floor of her house, charmingly furnished and flooded with natural light, had always been a source of supplemental income. Tenants came and went, their faces blurring into a forgettable procession of renters. But when Elena Vasquez stepped through the front door, camera swinging from her neck and a streak of sunlight catching the highlights in her dark hair, Amelia knew immediately that this tenant would be different. Elena had a presence that filled the room, all radiant smiles and restless energy. She spoke with a casual ease, her accent lightly inflected with traces of her upbringing in California. "This place is beautiful," she said, her gaze drifting up to the high ceilings and intricate crown molding. "It's like something out of a storybook." Amelia, standing by the doorway with her hands folded neatly in front of her, nodded. "It has its charm. It's been in my family for generations." "That must be nice," Elena said, turning her attention to Amelia. "A house with history. Stories to tell." The comment lingered in Amelia's mind long after Elena had signed the lease and moved her few belongings into the upstairs apartment. There was something about the way Elena looked at her, as if searching for hidden layers, that made Amelia feel both exposed and intrigued. In the weeks that followed, their interactions were polite but distant. Amelia kept to her routines, lectures at the university, quiet evenings reading on the porch, and expected Elena to do the same. But Elena's presence was impossible to ignore. She was always coming and going, her camera slung over her shoulder, her laugh echoing in the hallway as she took calls or greeted strangers with an easy charm. One evening, Amelia found herself sitting on the porch swing, nursing a cup of tea as the sun dipped below the horizon. Elena appeared at the top of the steps, a notebook in one hand and her camera in the other. "Mind if I join you?" Elena asked, her smile disarming. Amelia hesitated for a moment before gesturing to the empty spot beside her. "Of course." Elena settled in, her movements relaxed and unself-conscious. "I've been meaning to ask, what's it like teaching history in a town like this? Do you ever feel like you're surrounded by it?" Amelia glanced at her, surprised by the question. "Sometimes. But history isn't just about the past. It's about how it shapes the present." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good way to look at it. I guess photography's a bit like that too. Capturing moments so they don't get lost." The conversation flowed easily after that, winding from their professions to the quirks of Savannah life. Elena shared stories of her travels, deserts in Morocco, bustling markets in India, the serene beauty of Icelandic glaciers, and Amelia found herself captivated by the way Elena spoke, her words painting vivid pictures of far-off places. When Elena asked about her, Amelia hesitated. It wasn't often that she let people in, but there was something about Elena's curiosity that felt different. Tentatively, she spoke of her work, her love for the house, and the quiet satisfaction she found in Savannah's predictability. "You don't strike me as the predictable type," Elena said, her tone teasing but kind. Amelia laughed softly, the sound surprising even herself. "Maybe I've just gotten good at hiding it." Their late-night porch talks became a regular occurrence. They shared cups of tea and, on occasion, glasses of wine. Elena had a knack for drawing Amelia out, her questions probing but never invasive. She listened with genuine interest, her gaze warm and steady, and Amelia found herself revealing things she hadn't shared with anyone in years. One night, as a cool breeze rustled the leaves, Elena leaned back against the porch railing and asked, "Do you ever wish things were different? That you'd taken another path?" Amelia considered the question, her fingers tightening around her mug. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But this is the life I've built. It's safe." Elena's smile was gentle but knowing. Safe isn't always enough. The words stayed with Amelia long after Elena had gone back upstairs. There was a truth in them she couldn't ignore. A truth that had begun to take root since the day Elena walked into her life. It wasn't just their conversations that lingered. It was the way Elena's laughter seemed to fill the house, the way she hummed absent-mindedly as she worked, the way her eyes softened whenever she looked at Amelia. It was the moments when their hands brushed while passing a dish or when Elena's shoulder pressed against hers as they sat side by side on the swing. Amelia wasn't naive. She recognized the flutter in her chest for what it was, but acknowledging it was another matter. She had spent her life avoiding complications, and Elena Vasquez was nothing if not complicated. Still, she couldn't deny the way her heart raced when Elena's gaze lingered a second too long or the way her pulse quickened at the sound of her voice. For Elena, the intrigue was mutual. Amelia's quiet strength and subtle vulnerability fascinated her, drawing her in like the subjects of her photographs, layers waiting to be uncovered. But she could sense Amelia's hesitation, the careful lines she drew around herself, and she was determined not to push too hard. Instead, she let the moments build, trusting that when the time was right, those lines would blur. For now, she was content to sit on the porch beside Amelia, their conversations weaving a tapestry of connection that neither could deny. The storm arrived suddenly, sweeping through Savannah with the kind of force that made the ancient oaks groan under its weight. Rain lashed against the windows of the Victorian house, and thunder rolled through the night like an angry warning. Amelia Carter had always found storms unsettling, their unpredictability stirring an unease in her usually controlled life. But tonight the storm brought something else with it, something she couldn't have anticipated. Amelia was in the living room, a blanket draped over her legs, attempting to read by the dim glow of a lantern. The power had gone out hours ago, and though she had plenty of candles scattered around the room, the flickering light only added to the sense of isolation. She was just beginning to lose herself in the pages of her book when there was a knock at the door. It was tentative but insistent. Amelia set her book down and moved to answer it, her bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. When she opened the door, Elena stood there, damp from the rain despite the jacket she wore, her camera slung over her shoulder as always. "Sorry to bother you," Elena said, her voice soft but edged with unease. "It's just kind of eerie up there with the power out. Mind if I hang out down here for a while?" Amelia hesitated, her heart beating faster at the sight of Elena in the dim light. She couldn't exactly refuse. The house was just as much Elena's home now as it was hers. "Of course," Amelia said, stepping aside to let her in. "Come on in." Elena offered a small, grateful smile as she stepped inside, setting her camera on the side table. "Thanks. I just couldn't stand the quiet anymore." They ended up in the living room, sitting on opposite ends of the couch, a row of candles casting a warm glow between them. The storm raged outside, but in the flickering light the room felt cocooned, almost safe. Elena stretched out her legs, her posture casual, while Amelia sat primly, her hands folded in her lap. "It's kind of funny, isn't it?" Elena said after a moment. "The storm. The candles. It's like we're in some kind of old ghost story." Amelia smiled faintly. "If it is, let's hope it's a tame one. I've had enough excitement for a lifetime." Elena tilted her head, curiosity lighting her eyes. "Enough excitement? You, Amelia, seem like someone who keeps things very composed." Amelia felt the faintest flush rise to her cheeks. "Maybe too composed," she admitted. "It's easier that way. Less risk." Elena studied her for a moment, then leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "Okay, now I have to know. What are you so afraid of?" The question hung in the air, its simplicity masking its weight. Amelia hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. "It's not fear exactly," she said slowly. "Savannah. This town has a long memory and people talk. I've seen what happens when you stand out too much." Elena waited, sensing there was more. When Amelia didn't continue, she gently prompted, "Stand out how?" Amelia exhaled, the confession pulling at her like an anchor. "I'm queer," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "And in a place like this, that's enough to make you a target." Elena's expression softened, her voice low and steady. "I get it. Small towns can feel like they're always watching, always waiting for a reason to judge." "You have no idea," Amelia said with a bitter laugh. "For years I've kept everything so tightly locked up. It's exhausting, but it's the only way I know how to survive." Elena reached out, her hand brushing against Amelia's. The touch was fleeting but deliberate, sending a shock of warmth through Amelia's arm. "You don't have to explain yourself to me," Elena said softly. "I know what it's like to hide." Amelia's breath caught at the sincerity in Elena's voice. "Do you?" she asked, her gaze searching Elena's face. Elena nodded, her smile tinged with sadness. "Let's just say I've had my share of running away. From people. From places. From myself." The storm outside seemed to intensify, the thunder reverberating through the walls. Amelia wasn't sure if it was the storm or Elena's presence that made her pulse quicken, but she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward the woman sitting so close and yet so far. Their conversation quieted, the silence between them filled with unspoken words. It was a simple accident, one hand reaching for a candle, the other shifting on the couch, that brought their fingers together again. This time neither of them pulled away. Amelia's heart hammered as she looked up to find Elena watching her, her dark eyes full of intent. "I shouldn't," Amelia began, her voice trembling. "Maybe," Elena murmured, her voice low, "but do you want to?" The question was like a challenge and a lifeline all at once. Amelia didn't answer, not with words. Instead she leaned in, her hesitation melting as their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and urgent. Elena cupped Amelia's face with one hand, deepening the kiss, and Amelia felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, their foreheads resting together. Neither spoke, but the look in their eyes said enough. It was a moment they couldn't take back, a line they couldn't uncross. The morning after, the storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and the sky clear. Amelia found Elena in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, her expression unusually serious. "I need to tell you something," Elena said, her voice breaking the fragile stillness of the morning. Amelia's stomach tightened. "What is it?" Elena hesitated, then met her gaze. "I haven't been entirely honest with you. I'm not just a photographer. I'm also a journalist." Amelia blinked, confused. "Okay. And I'm here in Savannah to investigate someone," Elena continued. "A politician. He's been laundering money through local charities, funneling it into private accounts." Amelia's chest tightened with unease. "Who?" Elena hesitated, then said the name. The air seemed to leave the room as Amelia stared at her in disbelief. The man Elena had just named was not only a respected figure in the community but also a close friend of her family. "This is why I didn't tell you at first," Elena said, her voice pained. "I didn't want to drag you into this. But I couldn't. I couldn't lie to you anymore." Amelia turned away, her mind racing. The kiss they'd shared the night before, the connection she had dared to hope for, now felt impossibly tangled with the risk of everything she stood to lose. The days following Elena's revelation were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions for Amelia. She moved through her routines with the same careful precision as always, lecturing at the university, hosting community events, and maintaining her meticulously polite demeanor, but inside she was unraveling. Every time she caught a glimpse of Elena upstairs or heard her footsteps echoing in the hall, a sharp ache twisted in her chest. The pull between them was undeniable, but so was the risk. Amelia sat on the edge of her bed one evening, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her hair was pulled into a neat bun, her blouse perfectly pressed. On the surface she looked composed, the very image of a respectable woman in a respectable town. But her eyes betrayed her. They were heavy with sleepless nights and questions she couldn't answer. What if someone found out about Elena's investigation? What if they connected Amelia to it? And worst of all, what if everything she had worked for, her home, her career, her carefully cultivated life, came crashing down? Despite her fears, she couldn't stay away. The pull of Elena's presence was too strong, and their nightly meetings became a lifeline. They would sit on the porch under the cover of darkness, their whispered conversations blending with the hum of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. Amelia's voice was quiet but steady one night as she asked, "Do you ever think about leaving? Just walking away from all of this?" Elena looked at her, her expression softening. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I can't. Not when there's so much at stake. People like him, people with power, they count on others looking the other way. I can't do that." Amelia nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. "Just, I've spent my whole life trying to avoid standing out. Trying to be acceptable." "You don't have to be acceptable for me," Elena said, her voice low but firm. You just have to be you. The words lingered, wrapping around Amelia like a balm for wounds she hadn't realized were still open. When Elena reached out to touch her hand, Amelia didn't pull away. Instead, she intertwined their fingers, holding on like she was afraid to let go. But the outside world had a way of creeping in. Amelia began to notice subtle shifts in her interactions with the people around her. Friends of her family, neighbors she had known for years. Their questions felt sharper, their smiles more forced. One afternoon, during a community fundraiser, she overheard two women whispering just out of earshot, their eyes darting toward her before they turned away. The unease grew, gnawing at her like a constant, low-grade fever. She finally confronted Elena one evening, pacing the living room as Elena sat on the couch, watching her with a mixture of guilt and determination. "This is getting too close," Amelia said, her voice trembling. "People are starting to notice. I can feel it." Elena stood, her movements slow and deliberate. "I know this is hard," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But I promise you I'm doing everything I can to keep you out of this." Amelia turned to face her, her eyes flashing with a mixture of fear and anger. "But you can't promise that, can you? You can't control how people will react, what they'll think." "No, I can't," Elena admitted, stepping closer. "But I can control how I protect you. I would never do anything to put you in harm's way." The sincerity in Elena's voice softened Amelia's defenses, but the fear remained. She looked away, her voice breaking. "I don't know if that's enough." Elena reached for her hand, her grip steady and reassuring. "It has to be. Because the truth needs to come out, Amelia. It's not just about me. It's about all the people he's hurt, all the lies he's told." The full scope of those lies became painfully clear one afternoon when Amelia was in the university's records office. She had been reviewing documents related to a donation made to the school. A donation that had been intended to fund new educational programs but had mysteriously disappeared before it could be put to use. As she sifted through the files, her heart sank. The paperwork showed clear discrepancies, signatures that didn't match, and funds that had been redirected to private accounts. One name stood out among the tangled web of deceit: the politician Elena was investigating. Amelia stared at the documents, her hands trembling. This wasn't just corruption on a distant scale, it was personal. The missing funds had directly impacted her students, her colleagues, and her community. Her neutrality, her careful avoidance of conflict, hadn't shielded her from the fallout. If anything, it had made her complicit in a system that allowed such injustices to thrive. That night, she brought the documents to Elena, her face pale but her eyes blazing with determination. "You were right," Amelia said, laying the papers on the table between them. "It's worse than I thought." Elena scanned the documents, her jaw tightening as she pieced together the connections. "This is it," she said, her voice low but urgent. "This is the missing piece." Amelia sat down across from her, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "What happens now?" "We take this public," Elena said, her gaze steady. "With these documents, he won't be able to hide anymore." Amelia hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "And what about us?" Elena reached across the table, her hand covering Amelia's. "We figure that out together. But I can't do this without you." The words were both a plea and a promise, and Amelia felt something shift inside her. A quiet but resolute strength she hadn't known she possessed. For too long she had let fear dictate her choices. Now, with Elena by her side, she was ready to fight for something greater than herself. The air in Savannah was thick with tension, the kind that made even the most mundane actions feel heavy with consequence. Amelia and Elena had made their decision. They would expose the truth no matter the cost. But as they delved deeper into their investigation, the risks became impossible to ignore. Amelia, with her deep roots in the community, had access to spaces Elena could never infiltrate. Fundraisers, academic records, board meetings, places where the politician's influence lingered like a shadow. Though her hands often trembled as she copied documents or recorded conversations, Amelia steeled herself with the knowledge that every piece of evidence brought them closer to justice. Elena, meanwhile, worked tirelessly to compile the information into an airtight exposé. Late nights were spent at her desk, surrounded by papers and a laptop screen that illuminated her determined face. She sifted through financial reports, emails, and witness statements, piecing together a narrative that would be impossible to ignore. Yet even as she worked, her thoughts frequently wandered to Amelia. The weight of what they were risking, what Amelia was risking for her, made her chest ache with equal parts gratitude and guilt. The first real sign of danger came on a rainy afternoon when Amelia noticed a dark sedan idling across the street from her house. At first she brushed it off as a coincidence. But when the car reappeared the next day and again the day after that, unease settled over her like a storm cloud. She mentioned it to Elena, who immediately tensed. "They're watching us," Elena said, her voice low but steady. "They want to scare us into stopping." Amelia's heart raced. "What do we do?" "We keep going," Elena said, her gaze fierce. "If they're this desperate to stop us, it means we're getting close." Despite Elena's resolve, the fear was impossible to ignore. Threatening notes began to appear in their mailbox, short, chilling messages warning them to back off. One night, as they walked home from a meeting with a whistleblower, a shadowy figure followed them for several blocks before disappearing into an alley. Every creak of the house at night, every unfamiliar face on the street, became a potential threat. The breaking point came when Amelia was cornered outside the university. She had just finished a lecture and was walking to her car when a man stepped out of the shadows. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a sharp suit that couldn't disguise the menace in his eyes. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice oily and calm. "A word of advice: stay out of things that don't concern you." Amelia froze, clutching her bag tightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man smirked, leaning closer. "You're smarter than that. This little game you're playing? It's going to end badly. For you and your friend." A chill ran down her spine, but she refused to let him see her fear. "If you think threats are going to stop me, you don't know me at all." For a moment the man's smirk faltered. Then he straightened, adjusting his tie. "Consider this your only warning." With that he turned and walked away, leaving Amelia standing there, her heart pounding in her chest. When she told Elena what had happened, the fury in Elena's eyes was like nothing Amelia had ever seen. "That bastard," Elena hissed, pacing the living room. "He thinks he can intimidate you. Not on my watch." "Elena, please," Amelia said, her voice trembling. "He's dangerous." "So are we," Elena shot back, her gaze sharp and unyielding. "They want us to be afraid, but we're not backing down. Not now." The next day, Elena confronted the man in the middle of a crowded cafe. Amelia had begged her to let it go, but Elena was unstoppable. Standing tall and fearless, she called him out in front of everyone, her voice ringing with conviction. "You think you can scare us into silence," she said, her words slicing through the murmurs of the crowd. "You don't scare me. And you won't stop the truth." The man, clearly caught off guard, muttered something under his breath before storming out. The confrontation left Amelia shaken but also inspired. Elena's courage was contagious, and for the first time, Amelia felt the weight of her fear lift, replaced by a sense of purpose. The evidence they collected was damning. Financial records, forged documents, testimonies from whistleblowers. It was a web of corruption that implicated not just the politician but several of his associates. When the story finally broke, it sent shockwaves through Savannah. Headlines screamed of betrayal and greed, and the community that had once turned a blind eye could no longer ignore the truth. Amelia braced herself for the fallout. She knew there would be whispers, judgmental glances, and questions she wasn't ready to answer. But what she hadn't anticipated was the wave of quiet support. Former students reached out, thanking her for standing up for what was right. Neighbors stopped by with kind words, their approval subtle but genuine. Even some of her family, once staunchly aligned with the community's elite, began to see the value in her courage. One evening, weeks after the scandal had subsided, Amelia and Elena sat on the porch of the Victorian house. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the flowers they had planted together as a symbol of their new beginning. The chaos of the past few months felt like a distant memory, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. Elena leaned back against the porch railing, a glass of wine in her hand. "You know," she said with a small smile, "I never imagined I'd end up here. In Savannah. With you." Amelia looked at her, her eyes soft and full of gratitude. "And I never imagined I'd have the courage to let someone like you into my life." Elena reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. "We've come a long way." "We have," Amelia agreed, her voice steady. "And no matter what comes next, I'm not afraid anymore." They sat in companionable silence, the sun dipping below the horizon and casting the porch in a golden glow. For the first time in years, Amelia felt truly at peace. The journey had been hard, the risks immense, but what they had gained, truth, love, and a shared sense of purpose, was worth every moment. As the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, Elena turned to Amelia with a smile. Ready to take on the world? Amelia squeezed her hand, her own smile spreading slowly across her face. As long as I have you by my side,